I'm Sari.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Welcome back to Seamwork Radio. Today we're talking with Fuyo Watanabe, one of the 3 moderators of an incredible community on Facebook called Projectors for Sewing. The Projectors for Sewing community has over 30,000 members, plus free guides and resources to help people who sew use projectors to eliminate printing out sewing patterns and project a PDF pattern directly onto your fabric. And I know that might sound kind of tricky or difficult, but more and more people are using projectors to speed up their sewing. And Fuyo is going to share how it works and how to get started. So today we'll cover how you can use a projector and stop printing out your patterns, how much it might cost you to get set up, how to adjust and fit patterns if you're using a projector, that was a big question of mine, and where to find all the resources you need to get started. So this is a really fascinating conversation, and you can hear how passionate Fuyo is about this technology. So here's my interview with Fuyo. Hi, Fuyo. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so happy to have you.
Sure. My name is Fuyo Watanabe. On Facebook, I go by Fuyo Amy Watanabe, so you might see me under that profile name. And I'm one of the admins of the Projectors for Sewing Facebook group.
Great. We're so happy to have you to explain to us how all of this works.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So how did you get involved in the Projectors for Sewing Facebook group?
Really, it started, Missy Poor is our founder, and she just sent out kind of a message in one of the general sewing groups and said, I was kind of wondering if anyone's thought of this idea of using a projector to project a pattern. A couple of people were like, no, you should start a group. And so she went off and started a group. In a couple of months, there were, 2,000 people trying it out. And in the early days, we didn't know anything. We didn't know how it worked, what made it work. It's really important that when you're projecting a pattern, it has to be accurate because we need to have our garments come out the right size and dimensions, of course, right? Mm-hmm. It's super important. And so there was just this group of us doing this whole trial and error process, and that's basically how things got started.
So you really just kind of figured it out on your own.
Yes, and a lot of us tried a lot of different projectors and sent them back when they didn't work. We learned so much about them. Like, I don't think anybody had a background in, audio visual technology or anything. Mm-hmm. And especially, sort of knowing this crafting niche, I know there was a product where someone tried to market a projector that would do patterns, and I don't think it fully made it to market though, so that's unfortunate. So I think the idea had been around for a little while. It was just kind of a gang of people who decided to try and see if we could work it out, and with everybody's input, we managed to sort of figure out what the guide rails were for, this will work, there's a min, there's a max, there's a sweet spot that you need to find. And thank goodness for Amazon return policies, because I tried probably at least 6 projectors to find the right fit that would work in my space. But, the good thing is that with everybody contributing their information, then the next people coming down can just read about what we did versus having to do it themselves and benefit from all of that research.
So what was the impetus? Why were people so interested in using projectors? Like, what was the benefit for you guys?
I don't know what the tipping point was. It definitely, so for me, I'm a fairly new sewist. I didn't grow up with tissue paper patterns. I wasn't taught at home, and so when I started to sew garments and I was dealing with this tissue paper, I was like, what is this? I'm too clumsy, I think, to, be good. And I was like, oh, was I supposed to pin that down so it doesn't move? Like, I just had no idea how it worked. It seemed very finicky and fussy to me. Well, and with the PDF patterns that are quite popular that you could get online, that was it made more sense for me because I was just coming to the craft sort of, without any history. And so I was like, oh, printing these things off and just getting the one size that you need, using the layers, that makes way more sense. And I thought that the sticking and cutting, that seemed a little bit onerous. That was a lot of work. And so that was a bit of a turnoff. But then when Missy said, why doesn't anyone just project these things? And I was like, man, that would make life so much easier. And I was actually at that time, I was looking for an easier way. I was looking at using my die cutter. So I've got a Silhouette Cameo. And I was looking at trying to convert patterns so I could cut them out on a digital cutting machine. But of course, there was some restrictions on size and stuff like that. So I think it was just a lot of people at that time kind of looking for a better way. And it was just the perfect time to bring it up, and everyone jumped on to test it out.
Yeah. And how many members do you have now in the group? Do you know?
Right now, there's over 38,000 members.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's
Wow, that's
worldwide.
amazing.
Yeah.
That's really incredible. So, if somebody's interested in this, can you explain a little bit about what the process is like of using a projector in your sewing? How does it go?
For sure. So, I mean, if I'm going to start at the very beginning, the basics are that what you do is you connect a projector to your computer and it works like a second monitor. So, if you've ever been in an office where you had two monitors on the go, it's just like that. So, the projector is just like having an external monitor connected to your computer. Some of us hang them up on our ceilings, and then there are other types where you can set it on your table and it kind of shines sideways at an angle. But basically, you just aim that projector at your fabric, open up a PDF pattern, and then you can go ahead and cut it straight on your fabric with a rotary cutter. Or if you prefer to trace, some people are still taking that projection and then cutting it out on paper first. If you've got a lot of adjustments to make or, things like that, if you do a lot of grading or blending, then some people just prefer to do the paper first. But a lot of people just project it straight onto the fabric and go and cut from there.
Mm-hmm. That seems useful, especially if you're going to do a muslin anyway.
Yeah.
To start, you just want to start with the straight size out of the envelope and adjust from there.
Yeah. Yeah. But there's a lot of people who also will do their adjustments digitally. And when this first popped up, I thought, oh, nobody's going to figure this out. It's just way too much work to learn graphic software and, how to manipulate vector files and stuff. But surprisingly, a huge number of people have jumped on, and everybody's learning Inkscape, or they're using Affinity or Illustrator. And it's actually fairly easy to do it in a vector program on the computer. So I think one of the coolest things with the community is like you can see people of all ages, all nationalities jumping in, trying things out. It's the biggest thing is like, don't be scared. Just try it, dip your toe in, see if you like it or not. There's lots of people around that will help. There's one of our members who actually wrote some software for us that helps us with formatting our PDFs, and it's super quick and easy and slick. And so just with so many people contributing, it's just become like this amazing way to work with patterns and sewing.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of the spirit of sewing, being able to do something independently on your own and just figure it out as you go.
Yes, yes. And I think that's part of what has made it successful is in order to be good at this craft, like you really just have to be okay with trial and error. You have to be okay with like, well, I made this and it didn't work, start over. And, and then there's a lot of things that are like with knitting, right? Half the time you're ripping out stitches more than you're actually doing the knitting. And same with sewing. Like we all have our seam rippers where we spend a lot of time unpicking things and redoing them. But I think in order to stick with it, you have to have that mindset that it's never going to come out perfect, right? Well, not that never, but that you have to have this expectation that there might be a little bit of extra energy that goes into trying things and doing things until you get what you want. And so that is so true with projectors.
Yeah.
The odds that you get exactly what you want out of the gate are pretty slim. And so people do have a lot of little tricks that they do where they might build a different stand, or people have taken tiles out of their ceilings to push the projector up higher. But people just get so creative just to figure out that right sweet spot to get it to do what they want.
Yeah. And then it saves you time in the long run. So.
Oh, yeah. And it seems like a lot of work to get it set up. And sometimes it can be. But once it's done, once you do the initial, get over that hump of setup, then it's just smooth sailing. And people sew so much more because you don't have to, and especially with new patterns, right? If you're like, oh, well, I looked at this new pattern, but I don't want to tape it and print it. But with this, you can just like project it. You could actually just project it and you can really see it before you commit to anything. And then if you decide like, oh yeah, you know what, that's going to work, you can just cut it right there. It takes very little extra effort. There are fewer roadblocks sort of to stop you and get in your way of producing something.
Yeah, that's amazing. So are there any requirements that, anything that's required for people in order to do this, space, anything like that you absolutely need?
Yeah, so it's kind of like a trifecta. So if you're looking for a projector, there is a very small sweet spot of projectors that work for us. So you can't just go out and get any projector. You can't grab the one from the office and bring it home. The odds of it working are actually pretty slim. Because if you think about how projectors were designed, they kind of go in like a big meeting room up on the ceiling behind people, and they throw a very long distance away. But what we want to do is kind of go from the ceiling to a table, which is not a huge distance. So there aren't a ton of projectors that are designed to be used in that short distance. And that's been part of our journey, is figuring out which models of which brands do this well. And so there's three things you have to consider. One is, what space do you have? So the more flexible you can be with your space, the more options you'll have. If you're like, well, I don't really have a great high ceiling, but I wouldn't mind cutting on the floor. Like, some people already do cut on the floor. If you can go from ceiling to floor, you'll get a much larger image. So, and projectors are like, if you remember playing with a flashlight as a kid, the closer you put it to the wall, the smaller the light it gets, and the farther away you pull it, the bigger it gets. But then it does lose some of its clarity. It diffuses, right? So projectors work the same way. If it's too close to the surface, you're just going to get a tiny little projection, and that's not very helpful. Mm-hmm. We all have kind of a minimum size it has to be as well in order for it to be useful. If you can only project the size of, a sheet of copier paper, that's not helpful. We might as well just print those out, right? So there's a lot of different things that you have to throw into consideration. And that's why I think the group has become such a good resource, because it's like sewing. Like, you can't just go, oh, I'm going to get a projector and put it up. You have to measure some stuff. You have to think about what you want. You have to think about what your output should be. It's just like sewing, right? Like, you can't just tell your friend, well, pick a pattern and I'll do it, It has to be like, okay, well, what are your measurements? What's your style? What do you want at the end of the day? It's not a completely generic thing. There are a few things that you have to understand before you jump in. And we've written a bunch of guides to help. And then also, all the people in the group are super helpful. So if you just post a question, someone will jump in and help you out. But yeah, it's not the sort of thing where you can go to the store and say, I need a projector for sewing. They don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. And there are people who come on and say, oh, I heard about this projector thing and I bought one and it's not working. And that happens often as well. So I do sort of recommend that if you want to get into it, definitely do a little bit of research. It is overwhelming. It is a lot of information, but to try to at least absorb a little bit about the basics that you need to get started. So just sort of, what do you need for it to be useful? How big do you need it to be? How clear do you need it to be? And then also, if you have enough space for it. And if you don't, then there's other things you can do. And also your budget. If you have a high enough budget, you could do anything you want.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. How much would people expect to spend on getting set up?
So in our group, so like I said, there are some people who don't have a problem dropping $8,000 on a sewing machine, right? And, like, I wish, but that's not me. And so in our group, we sort of run this general area where we try to stay under about $200 Canadian. So that's about $150 US. And most of our recommendations fall in that group. If you want to go out and spend $800 or $1,000 on a projector, of course you can. But, the rest of us would most likely prefer to spend that on sewing and fabric, right? And you can do it if you need to do it for $50, you can. There are a lot of used options out there, and there's a lot of really good bargains on Amazon as well. But again, the options become narrower as you go down in price, so you have to be aware that you might get restricted in other areas if you do that. But yeah, anywhere from $50 to $200, I think you'll get a fairly decent setup.
I'm curious what the difference is between one of those inexpensive, maybe $100 projectors and the close to $1,000 projectors. What sort of features? What's the range of features there?
Generally, the more expensive ones are going to have newer technology. So they're going to be brighter. They're going to be clearer. When we started, a lot of us were happy enough if we could just see the lines of the pattern. We didn't really need to read the text, because it is hard to get a projector that will give you the clarity where you can read the small text. There's a lot of fine print on patterns. We would put the pattern up on our monitor as well as on the projector. And so if you needed to read some instructions, you would just look at your monitor to read. But all we wanted at the very beginning was we just need to follow the lines to do our cutting. And that's where we started out. So for people who don't have a lot of distance up to put a projector up on their ceiling, we recommend ultra short throw projectors, which are the type that you see in classrooms a lot. So they're mounted on the wall and they point a picture kind of at a 45-degree angle straight onto the wall. And these might have been smart boards or things that you see in classrooms. And they have mirror technology in them that instead of shooting the image across, it shoots it straight down. And so what we can do is turn those 90 degrees and set it on a table and shoot it down at the table. However, those projectors are $800 to $1,500 new. But what we've discovered, and just through everybody contributing, is that we're at this like point in time where those models are becoming outdated, and a lot of classrooms are switching over to, LED and, televisions and that sort of thing. And so there's a lot of these out on the secondhand market. And so people are picking these up for $50, $150, $200 and saving hundreds. However, what I would say about those ones is that because they're older, so they may have been in service in a classroom for 8, 10, 12 years, they don't have quite the clarity, the brightness. At the time they were made, they were top of the line. They're not top of the line anymore. And then also they've been in use for a long time. So, there might be dust, there might be, things on them that come with age and use. But it's perfectly usable for a lot of people. And again, it's a great option to save money to just get them secondhand. And it is kind of funny how right at this point in time, there's so many classrooms that are just, clearing these things out. You see people, with a truck bed full of these. They've gone to an auction and just bought the entire school board's, supply of these projectors. So it's kind of worked out really nicely.
So you mentioned stands earlier. So one option is to mount it from the ceiling. Another is a stand. What do people use for stands? How do they construct those or buy those?
All kinds of different things, all kinds. And this is where you kind of see the creativity of the spouses come in sometimes, where, the husband will go out to his wood shop and come back, and he's made something. And so one of the most important things with the projector I mentioned earlier was that it has to be accurate. So you need to be able to adjust the projector's angle and position to make sure that it's shining its light square to your surface. Otherwise, you'll get distortion and one side will skew or one corner will be off. Having a stand that allows for adjustment is hugely important, and like micro adjustment. So you could just tap it a little bit and it'll stay put. And that's another thing. So a stand, once you get it to where you need it to go, you want it to fix its position solidly. Otherwise, every time you fire it up, you're going to have to keep adjusting it, right? There are people who have their projectors mounted on a ceiling and they've got kids that run and it jiggles it loose. And so, but again, this community, people have come up with these ideas like, oh, you know what? I put a piece of sandpaper in the joint of the mount and that holds it steady. Or I use a shelf bracket, or there are people who are taking GoPro mounts and camera mounts and mounting them to tension poles and all kinds of things. There are specific things that you need a mount to do, and it doesn't exist. Like, oh, you can't go to the store and say, sell me a mount for a projector for sewing. It doesn't exist today. But people have just overcome it with so many amazing creative ideas.
Yeah, that seems like the power of community. All these people coming up with their own ideas and helping solve this variety of problems, since I'm sure everybody's different.
The community is worldwide. Like we have, people in the UK and Europe and South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. And it's kind of funny because, you're sitting here thinking like, I can't get this to work. And if you just post it, someone else will be like, oh yeah, that happened to me. And this is what I did. And here's some pictures. And so super helpful community.
Yeah. We were talking earlier about adjustments. So you mentioned that people sometimes project onto paper and then cut the pattern out and make their adjustments from there. Are there other ways that you can make adjustments directly if you're just projecting directly on your fabric?
Yeah, so if you're doing something simple, like you need to extend for size, say you've got super long legs, not a problem that I have, but some people, I'm jealous of those that do. So you can just mark on your fabric. Usually there's a line going across, say, a pant leg that says extend here. You could actually draw that and then draw it on your fabric with chalk, and then move the projection, and so that it covers the rest of the length. And so what you do is you scroll it. You're not actually moving your projector. You're scrolling on your PDF pattern on the computer. You just scroll it and then line it up with that line that you made, and then you can keep cutting from there.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. There's so many creative things you can do with it. It's hard to fathom coming up with all of this, but I guess with a community that size.
It really is sort of building up upon, somebody discovered one thing and that solved the problem, but then something else came up. And a lot of it is just things that you wouldn't know until you get there. Right? Mm-hmm. I could tell you all of these things ahead of time and none of it will make any sense. But when you get there, you'll be like, oh, that's what they were talking about.
And then I had a question about the patterns. Can you do this with just any pattern? Or are there specific kinds of patterns that you need to use or features?
Yeah, so what we've found is there are certain features on a pattern that work better. So number one, it has to be a PDF pattern. We've had some people ask like, oh, I've got these wonderful vintage patterns. And it's like, unless it's, on your computer, it's not going to work. One of the things that we discovered, especially with some of the older models, some of the USTs, the ultra short throw projectors that we use, because they're a little bit older, the clarity and brightness isn't there. So it's nice if a pattern has thick lines. Some patterns have very thin lines. Often pattern designers will use dashed or dotted lines for the different sizes, and that can be difficult to see with a projection. Also, colors. A lot of pattern designers will use, a wide range of colors so that you can see the different sizes. But the light colors are extremely hard to see. And so when designers come into our group and ask, well, how should I be formatting my patterns to be optimized for projectors? We want thick, clear lines. We want really large text if you can. Layers are extremely important because we just turn off all the layers that we want. So if you needed, say, a size 10 and a size 14 and you were going to take certain pieces from each one, you would just have those two layers on, and you really need to sort of get rid of the noise. So we want to be able to turn off layers of other things. Having a spot to calibrate is extremely important. So there needs to be a section that has a 1-inch grid. I guess it doesn't have to be an inch, but in inches or centimeters. So a lot of designers will just put a whole grid layer where the whole thing is a grid. Some will just have a box, but you need to be able to double check before you start cutting that you are calibrated appropriately. Otherwise you'll end up with giant, granny panties or a tiny little doll-sized outfit. Everybody does that too by accident at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, I think with printing too, we've seen that a lot.
Yeah, it's so easy to do, right?
Yeah. So if somebody wanted to explore this, they were brand new to it, how would you recommend they get started in learning about it?
Definitely join the group and check out the guides. So myself, Missy, and Sasha Sewist, she's very big on the Facebook communities for sewing. We've written some guides that sort of walk you through step by step. We have one for, how to pick your projector. We have one for how to calibrate it and how to set up. One for once you have everything set up, here are some tips for when you're cutting and projecting, and just like the first questions we know you're going to ask out of the gate. With all of the wisdom gathered from the crowd, we've sort of condensed that and put it into one place. One of the things we did in the beginning was we just sort of asked everyone to send us their data of like, which projector are you using and what dimensions are you getting out of that and how do you like it? And so we've also got all that data collated, and there's a little chart that you can look at. So if someone else has the same setup that you have, you can sort of see what they used. Again, because everybody's different. Everybody has a different computer. It's crazy how many components will affect your projection, what computer you've got, what cables you have, how you're connected to the projector, the actual screen resolution of your computer screen, of your projector. It's all of these things can combine and make it a very confusing and complicated process. And so that's why we have all this stuff documented, because we don't want people to lose their hair, and we don't want people to quit either. So if you've tried it and you can't figure it out, come into the group, post a question. Again, because we have people all over the world, there's always somebody there's always somebody awake. People will, usually just happily jump in there and give you some guidance and help, because the setup is not simple. The setup is, can be complicated, but once you have it, it's beautiful. It's funny because I remember one of the earliest setups, someone said, you know what, I just got my 13-year-old to do it and it's perfect. We were like, oh, that's the key. You just need someone who's, much more in trend with all of the technology out there.
Maybe we can hire a 13-year-old. We're looking at getting one for our studio so that we can project our patterns and save paper.
Yeah. Well, actually, Missy has started a little service to help people virtually because, a lot of people sort of work with computers at work and stuff, and they have some, idea how to hook up a monitor. But a lot of people don't. They don't have any clue which end of the plug goes where. And so for those people, Missy does walk them through it. We all found that we were spending so much time helping people, and Missy was like, you know what, I'm just going to offer this as a service. So for those who just want it absolutely handheld and done, that's great. If you're more of a do-it-yourselfer and you want to dig in there and figure it out, that's what all our resources are for. The group is there to help answer specific questions. It's like I said, don't be afraid to try it, because Definitely there are some hurdles. Some people have a super easy time of it. Some people, want to rip their hair out, but we'll get you there at some point. And it's so worth it. Like, there are a few stories of people who are like, no, I went right back to paper. But most people, most people in general are just so much happier. If you have kids that grow, it is so much easier to use a projector every time they change size. And if you're a tester, if you're a pattern tester, because I know, people give their feedback and then the designer changes something, you'd have to print all that stuff off again. So much easier to use a projector. So there's no going back, I think, once you get it and you get in the groove of it. It's really, really cool. And I'm surprised at how many pattern designers out there it's just a thing now to have a projector formats out there. It's really cool.
Yeah, 2 of the people on our team have projectors at home for their sewing.
Oh yeah, and what do they say?
They love it. They're really into this whole thing. In fact, Robin, our pattern maker, is the one who introduced me to you because she's part of the Facebook group and she loves it.
Yeah. Well, especially if you're a pattern maker, she must make so many changes constantly, right? And she doesn't have to print anything ever again.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like such an amazing, generous community, and it's incredible that you guys have put together all these resources for free for people to use to improve their sewing lives. It's really awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun too. And, we have a lot of members that all just sort of contribute. So it is sort of a great example of the spirit of community coming together.
Absolutely. Well, do you have any other final tips or anything that you want to share with before we go?
I feel like I talked a lot. You asked a lot of good questions. I mean, in general, I'm a huge fan of it, sewing with a projector. I really feel like, yes, it makes things easier, but it really, for me, it helps me stay motivated, because sometimes you just kind of think about like, then I have to do this and I have to do this. And it just takes that big hurdle out of the way and lets you keep doing the fun stuff, which is, making it, and it gets you to like done faster, which I think a lot of us like. When you see the final product of whatever you've been slaving over, that's the feeling that we're after, right? That's why we make things versus buying them, is because you like that sense of accomplishment and that feeling of having done something. And so this, for me, takes some of the tedium out of it. Some people enjoy the cutting and taping, which I find odd, but I'm not one of those people, but so yeah, for me, I just really like that it speeds the process up and it gets you to finished faster. I really would encourage everyone to at least come have a look and see what it's all about. If you're not ready yet, that's fine, but just come understand the lingo and see what's going on.
Yeah. We recorded an episode recently that was about our favorite sewing tools, and one of the things we discussed there is a tip that Haley got from one of the members in our community, which was, if there's a part of the process that you don't enjoy, that you hate, find a tool that makes it easier. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great tip, and it definitely applies here. If you don't like cutting, if you don't like pasting together the pattern, then here's a tool that's going to make it easier, and that's going to motivate you to sew more, just like you're saying.
Yeah, and I think that's huge for a lot of people, where they get into this funk where they're like, oh, I used to love this, and what happened? And so hopefully, if you can get rid of that one little piece of the puzzle, it might help you get your mojo back and get going.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Fuyo.
Oh, no problem. This was fun.
Thank you to Fuyo for sharing her knowledge of using projectors for sewing. And if you're interested in this, be sure to head over to their Facebook group. We'll put the link in the show notes. They have lots of resources there for you to check out. So be sure to head over there. We also have an article in Seamwork this month all about using projectors for sewing. So be sure to head over to Seamwork and check that out as well. We'll also put a link in the show notes for that. Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you next week on Seamwork Radio. Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the team at Seamwork. Seamwork's an online community that supports you in creating a wardrobe that feels right for you. When you join us at Seamwork, you become part of our private community of makers, and you also get access to monthly sew-along classes, a library of over 200 sewing patterns, and tons of great resources to help guide you through the sewing adventure that you choose. Podcast listeners can get half off a Seamwork Unlimited membership, which means you can download as many of those 200 plus patterns as you want at any time, and our community will be there to guide and support you. If you'd like to join us for half off, just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find us on Instagram at Seamwork, or visit our YouTube channel, which is called Seamwork Video. We love hearing from you, so let us know if there's a topic or a personal story that you'd like us to cover. Thanks for listening to Seamwork Radio.